and welcome to the Flowstate. This is a podcast where we talk about design, innovation, strategy, and basically anything you can associate with creativity. On today's episode, we have with us Melissa and Sachin, who together run their architectural design studio practice called BandukSmithStudio. It's based in Ahmedabad, which is where we are at shooting this episode. And today's episode is special because we talk about a lot of interesting things. It's not just about their careers and their journeys, but we also cover a lot of wider topics, talking about governments and public spaces and how design can play a role in the larger public picture. So stick around for some interesting conversations coming up ahead. So welcome to the podcast, Sachin, Melissa. So nice to have you here. Thank you so much, by the way, for doing this. So to introduce myself quickly, my name is Jena, and this is Pruthviraj.
Hello.
And we're your hosts for today, for this podcast. Hi. And I want to start with an interesting anecdote. So before we kick the podcast off. So I basically grew up in a joint family, and we had a very confused sense of space in terms of design, because everybody did their own thing in the house and we had our own rooms, and it never made sense to me and I never associated myself to that space. But it's when I moved into the first house with my mom and dad, which Sachin designed actually, is when I got an idea of a space that I find that I belong to. And it gave me like an idea of like what my visual aesthetics are like and how do I align with them, and like just a sense of a physical space. And I sort of grew up, comparing things with that. So you were a part of my early design influences, by the way, like visually and like in terms of physical spaces. So I want to know for the both of you, what was that like for you growing up? Were there any influences that you had, or like is it just something that comes naturally to you, if it does?
I think you need to start because as the influence. What was yours?
So I think, growing up, India has really, rich cultural heritage. You go to these old temples, you see old textiles, you see old jewelries. And I think I was in small towns around Gujarat. We traveled extensively across the country. And everywhere, everybody was interested in, seeing newer things. And I think that really got me interested in everything that was well done, well crafted. And I think that the other side of it was that I grew up in small towns, and we were always surrounded by nature. And there's this very interesting perception that kept getting built, that you want to serve humans, you want to be, surrounded by these beautiful objects and beautiful spaces. At the same time, you also want to be with nature, and so that's where I'm constantly at.
It's interesting. I grew up in a very different context. I grew up in Michigan, in the suburbs of a small town or a small city. And I actually don't think that before I went to architecture, I thought that much about design. I was interested in studying architecture as a sort of general possibility for what it can do. It was sort of this vehicle that I could use to pack in all of my other interests. And I think in some level I still do that. But once I moved to California to study architecture, and then right after I finished studying architecture, I moved to India. And I think it's been really interesting for me, or sort of one of the critical things is that when I moved here, everything's unfamiliar, right? So I don't have this base that I'm steeped in. I don't have any of the traditions. None of them were mine when I came. And so what that does is it kind of makes everything really apparent, right? So you can't not see anything, right? Nothing flows into the background. And so I think the depth of my understanding, the development of my understanding of craft really came from this sort of like shock to the system of moving to a totally new place and having to learn how to work in it, and to not, and like being the outsider and sort of letting that translate and making that question how things are done or why things are done. I think a lot of my sort of education of a designer started at that point, actually. in coming here. I sort of learned the skills of it before I came, but really the sort of depth of it is through practicing in this new place and making the unfamiliar familiar, and sort of becoming part of it.
And I would also want to ask, like, it's interesting, just a brief note where everyone would love to know how you both met, if you can touch upon that, and then answer this, that initially when you started off, how was it picking up projects, and then how is it now, the contrast between that? So brief from there, and you can segue into that. It'll be interesting for us to know.
Do you want to tell how we met, or do you want me to start with how we met?
You have
the
to
story will be different depending on who tells.
You approached, so you have to.
Oh, not true. We met in Ahmedabad. So I had a research fellowship. I was studying at Berkeley, and I got a fellowship to look at, I think at the time I was studying modernist vernacular. I had this sort of theory that modernism had been planted in India and that you would find vernacular versions of modernist architecture. And so I was looking for them. And I had come to Chandigarh, and then I came to Ahmedabad because CEPT University was in Ahmedabad and their library was supposed to be the best. And a friend of mine who was studying architecture with me at Berkeley had gone to CEPT in his undergrad, happened to be a batchmate of Sachin, and so gave me his number as someone that I could call, who knew the local scene, who could help me out with anything. And that sort of started a conversation and a collaboration and a couple of trips around the globe for a while, and eventually ended up in setting up a practice here, which is still running. And so we are still here doing that.
We're still trying to make our ideas meet.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask actually. How do you two like align on projects? Is it like, because I'm sure that there's differences in opinions. So like, so how do you like sort of work together as a team?
I mean, there are specific areas of interest, and I think because of that we have, expertise in certain subjects. Some projects we say that who is sort of leading it. There are a lot more design stages where we do collaborate and seek each other's opinion, and of course we have a exciting team that we work with, and I think it's fairly collaborative. It does take the toll because you have to go through, like all possible iterations in conversations, but it does bring out a very interestingly layered result.
Yeah, I think one thing I've keep remembering is it's always good to have someone in the room who doesn't agree with you, someone who disagrees, because I think having the conversation or having to negotiate forces us to think about what are the priorities. It makes the designs better. I think the disagreements actually are the sort of really interesting frictions that make us push our designs further.
You can reflect upon your ideas and then
reiterate and also if you're if you're BSing or if it's a bad idea, there's someone there to call you out. I think that's really also important. Both of us have been in that role where we had a bad idea and the other person saw it. And I think there's also, it reinforces when there's a good idea, you're like, it's tweaking it, and it goes further. I think those are the exciting parts of working together. Sometimes we also say, I think I've said to people before, mostly because everyone assumes that I'm the interior designer, that our interests meet at architecture. I'm actually by education, I'm an architect and an urban planner. And so architecture is sort of the smaller scale, and then I'm really interested in thinking outward about what the impacts are at the urban level and what that means. And Sachin's really interested in you're interested in architecture, and then he has a deep interest, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but he has a deep interest in detail, material, even to the chemical makeup, of the different materials we use and how they age. So I think having that sort of scalar difference in the sort of part of architecture that we're passionate about is also useful, because we sort of have the areas that I would really be really want to hang on to are not necessarily the same that he would. So that actually brings depth to the projects.
creates a balance sort of.
Yeah. And it means that there's somebody looking at all the different aspects. It's not that we're both sort of honed into this one area. We can sort of spread out that way.
But that brings me to so many questions. But first of all, then I would also like to ask, when you started off together, how was it going and getting projects? Because you are for anyone coming out of college now or after masters, and design is, when you were there, design was still accepted in India. It's still coming in. Now design is there, but it's seen in various different lights. So the problem is still there to go and get projects, just in a different way. But it would be really interesting if you can tell us what sort of things you learned or some lessons that were interesting in the initial stages that you would have done better, or you think one should do this, or how you went about it to get projects.
So, I mean, I started, practicing alone before I met Melissa. And I mean, I had done some work with professors of mine, some research documentation work and things like that. Then for me and 3 other friends, we started a practice. We did a couple of projects. With another friend, I did, couple of projects. And then, we're still you're still trying to, finish your study, and, somebody comes to you and, hey, do you want to do this project? And that's how those projects were. And then once I got done with my my studies, I was looking for work, and one thing was very clear that, I'm interested in many design fields. So I started, I was doing professional photography, I was doing professional graphic design, I was doing product design, I was doing interior design, I was doing all kinds of things. The idea was that I had this belief, and I still have that belief, that if you are doing good work, a new work will follow, and I think that has been true until now.
So you believe in the school of thought of the work would speak for itself.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
and I think it cannot be hidden, I mean, somewhere or the other you will find the acknowledgement and crowd that appreciates it.
Yeah, I think, you could also say we're not particularly good or out there at sort of selling our work. We do the work whenever there's a time crunch, whenever there's a priority crunch. It's always about getting the project built. It's never about selling the project afterwards. But I think when in the beginning, now his beginning is earlier. When I joined, we set up the practice in 2011 after I finished my master's, and we had a couple of projects that were for sort of young couples who were also part of joint families, who were doing their first thing on their own, which in some cases was, a lounge or their space on the terrace of the house, or enclosing a veranda so that they could create a place to entertain their friends, or building a new structure, farmhouses, these kinds of smaller projects. But I think what was really interesting about those is that it was all sort of a younger cohort, it was our cohort, and we were setting out, we were trying to prove ourselves. They're trying to prove themselves.
And it was
so we're all kind of a part of the same thing of sort of establishing ourselves and saying, we're here, we're different, we're trying to do something new. So a lot of our first work there was a trajectory in that sort of been building on. And I think there was a point when we decided that, after about 5 years in practice, we said, okay, we're doing lots of private projects. What more can we do, or how can we think about what we want to do as a practice? Because when you start, you take every work, anything you can get. I mean, we never said no to anything.
There was an interesting point where one of large corporate interior project came to us, and we were we had 6 projects at that time with small team, and I would say those were still early days, and we took a conscious call that let us figure out what we are doing, how we are doing, and then sort of scale up. And so we did not go ahead taking up that project.
Okay.
And I think it's important, what are your weaknesses and strength, and what you want to build on, what you want to fine tune. I think you have to do that in early days of
But
your practice.
when do you realize like
I mean,
when
for,
to say no,
That's
or
hard.
like this is not something we can do, or
well, in that case, it was like that particular project would have required us to move towards a larger scale, more corporate structure of a firm, which meant that we would be moving into manager positions. We would have had to, like, the scale that we needed to work at would have required that we manage the project and that we have other designers working.
but you are
with
more
it.
in hands-on. You would
Yes.
like to.
And so
work
that
on
was very clear to us at the time that we want, like, what we're really interested in the practice is about projects that allow us to innovate or test new things, not necessarily sort of establishing systems that we can reproduce. I think that's another mode of practice where you sort of identify an area of expertise and you get really good at the system that's required to producing that. Like if you want to say go into housing or healthcare or like something where you have a typical typology. And that's also an important type of practice. But what we really got excited about was the sort of, the connections that you make laterally across projects of different types, of different scales, and the projects where you kind of are trying to figure out something new. And so we turned that down, and instead we started looking at competitions or ways to get into public work and public projects, because we still felt that we wanted to look at projects that would have more impact on more people, but in a way that we could be still working at diverse scales and on diverse projects, I guess. And so then we started sort of looking at, there were some competitions we did for public projects. We started, that's how we got impaneled actually with the municipality and started doing work. And this has been a slow process, because I'd say it was about 2016 that we decided to do this, and we opened our first public project in 2022. 2022.
So just the execution is taking more time, and
Well, I mean, COVID happened, so there was a slowdown in a lot of things. But it's more like we did a competition for a project that the project didn't happen, but we got impaneled for another one. The project started, it stalled, COVID happened, it restarted. And so the actual construction, this was a lake, Charori Lake in Ahmedabad. And this was, I think the construction started in 2018, right? 2019. So the actual construction was 3 years, including a pretty large break for COVID. And plus it's a lake, so monsoon, when it fills up, there's other slowdowns. But I think we've done that, and now we're doing other public projects around the state. In small towns, we've sort of also taken a sort of intentionally decided to work in nagarpalikas, places that are not even on the radar as small towns or small cities. They're bigger than villages, but they're really populations of less than 100,000 or populations of 30,000, 40,000. When we talk about small cities in India, we still talk about 1 million people or more, right? That's a small, Palanpur in Gujarat is a small city.
Like, it's very interesting because apart from the other factors that if you go into private sector or if you go into government, they have different factors in each of them. But one basic factor which maybe the baby designers who are coming in now or the future students who are going to come into design or even professionals, everything comes down at certain point about finance, about practicality. I would want to ask you, if you don't mind, when you took that decision of not taking up a private huge industrial project, which was something would take you a managerial level versus doing something which you're passionate about, the balance in terms of how you got the pluses and the minuses, how you made that decision, how you came on the same page that, listen, this is something that is our passion, but it comes with such consequences, versus something which can bring us this, but this is not something of a passion.
Yeah, I think we are still reeling from the losses.
Okay. No, I think there is a reality that if you want to we're working on public projects, which means we don't only work on public projects. We have private projects also, and we cross-subsidize in the office. If we want to talk about practice and talk about how that works, we in order to manage what it means to do the public project, which is more work than a private project, a pretty elongated process and a fee structure that doesn't necessarily match that, then we are drawing from the fact that we also have private projects that we're compensated well for.
But is it like more fulfilling, you would say, to do public projects?
I think, I wouldn't say more fulfilling. I think there's different kinds of fulfilling. Like when you are able to complete a project that like other people can access and go to, I think that's really exciting. And that's not necessarily just municipal projects. Like we did this architecture and design library in Ahmedabad called Art Sheila. And so many people go there. It's got a beautiful collection. It's got amazing books. It's got films, performances, wonderful things. It's really nice. It's a private project, but it's a public-facing institution. It's free entry. Everything is open, and it's sort of the whole thing is designed so that people gain more knowledge about culture of architecture design. And so, to have a building that people go to and then let you write you about or remember or are asking about the details, see it, that is really cool. And I think that we're not really, it's not that we need to do something that's publicly funded or privately funded. We want architecture in the space where the people who are coming to it aren't necessarily just the people who it's designed for. Where there's more of an audience, which I think is really fulfilling. But I also think that that's not to sort of reduce the fulfillingness of private projects. We're sitting in a private project. This was an incredible project because, we were able to work on a level of craft and the sort of merging the traditional and modern system in a way that would be really hard to do if it wasn't private. The freedom that it gives, and the level of craft, level of skill you can work with. I think all of those things are wonderful. And so for us, at least for me, and Sachin maybe disagrees, but the diversity is what's really interesting. I think I would get bored if I did the same type of project all the time, even though maybe I would become an expert in that one little thing. I think the beauty of practice and design practice especially is that if you're really good at this one thing called design, it actually has a lot of applications that are pretty diverse. And it's really exciting to be able to work across those.
The simple answer to what you asked is it is fulfilling. But I think the important thing here is that what are your abilities and how best can you serve with those abilities and the kind of reward that you get from that, And I think we both are, hungry to cater to this diversity of design applications that are needed, and in private projects we have far more space, time, and possibilities to do I would say evolution of design, refinement of design, and with much better access to craft and things like that. It does not stop us from trying those things in public projects, I would say. We try to stretch the limit of that as well. And we have, we've tried those things because we think that whether you do private projects or public projects, there is this agenda of, social upliftment. You want that the optimism remains. There is this feel-good factor that remains, and I think that's important thing to know.
Yeah, and you guys have been also talking about wanting to contribute to public spaces and how India as a country needs to do more with their public spaces because we don't necessarily have a lot of places we can go to, other than malls or theaters, and basically
So for the longest time, so one of our sort of convincing speech for our contractor when we did the lake project here, I kept telling him almost every meeting, when I was trying to push them, that look, on this stretch of highway, tell me one place where you can sit without paying money, and it's a fact that I don't think just because you have less money or more money, you have, you should be stopped from enjoying certain kind of environment. And I think if we can do that, if we can, bring quality in our public spaces, that everybody can access, I think we have probably not quantified, but we would be hugely better off as a society.
And public spaces also, like, I may be wrong, but this is how I have framed that opinion, that a large part of making public spaces, whether it be contractors or architects, not mainly architects, but contractors or civil engineers or whoever it is, or maybe someone who is not has an expertise in that particular field and has been given the work to do that, they look at something which is a very good thing, maybe in Europe or somewhere in Japan or something like that, and then to just bring it to India without maybe understanding whether it will work over here, whether it won't.
Yeah, like the context of it.
Context of it.
So this is something that is a very very interesting question. It's a constant debate here in our office. I think if there is one thing I can claim, I can say that I know our people. I've been in different parts of Gujarat, and I've changed 7 schools in 12 years, of my study, and I've sort of, growing up, I've seen enough people very closely, and I thrive knowing people and rituals of people, the way they use, their environment, from private spaces to public spaces. And I think that combined with our sort of, universal understanding of, how nature works, how systems work, how, the expectations from infrastructure because of certain kind of usage works. I think together we bring in that very interesting balance in creating good public spaces, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about translating design into Indian public space, I think there's a couple of sort of really critical things that we always think about. Like, we have a really intense climate. Our climate is quite harsh for material and space, right? You've got like sun that bakes things, and then you've got water that soaks things, right? And then on top of that, in Ahmedabad at least, we have dust. So our spaces, like, materially need to be really robust. The way that we make them need to be robust. And then the other thing is that we have people, so many people, and it's sort of exacerbated by the fact that we have less public space that people can use, and so whichever spaces we do have are just sort of intensely crowded.
Yeah.
And I think to be able to sort of think about and design for that level of crowd, that level of intensity, is something that we have to take very seriously. But I think that there's a lot of potential in that, in the way that we sort of translate, or the way that we understand how people will use space, and what are the ways that we can design for it.
So building up on what you said about public spaces, I want to understand, how do you think the design language of public spaces in India has evolved over the years?
I think there's 2 different kinds of design language that we have to talk about in public space. If we look at old spaces, we have, the stone and the sort of, which now are sort of heavily used, or spaces that we look at almost as sort of ruins, or
Reminiscence of the past.
Yeah,
Dilapidated maybe to some extent.
Which I think, we see them as things of beauty. I'm not sure the general public sees it that way. And I think what has been happening, now is more of there was a lot of intense forms and types of spaces, and I think then it's become much more streamlined and more minimal in the way that we look at, particularly in public space. I think architecture has a slightly different parallel, but in the way that public spaces are designed today, there's actually far less ornamentation or flourishes on them.
And is it because of the cost structure, and how, or something else? And how does it affect the general population with their psychology, or the mood around, the emotions that the architecture of public space affects that?
It's actually an interesting question. So the speed of production We want faster transformation of whatever places that we are attending. We have noticed that if that place is lacking the crafted nature, it doesn't necessarily have to be, say, like decorated or carved out or anything like that. But if you see that if it just feels like that it's a rationalized, sort of without giving thought to, how people are going to use this space or how nature is going to thrive in this space.
The context of that.
Yeah, the context of that space. You will see that those places are not actually successful. But even in the modern context, the most sort of banal looking spaces, which, one would be surprised if it is rightly placed in a context, with the user group, they have thrived, they have transformed, people have taken over, people have participated. And see, all of these public places, essentially they are part of how can everybody have good life, how can people have better life than what they have right now. We used to have it in our older settlements where family would come together, communities would come together, the town will come together. As we have become more and more isolated in our sort of nuclear lifestyle, public places, they are like places where you identify yourself with anonymous crowd. And I think their existence, places where which ignite these sort of interactions are very important. So I think if your town has natural phenomena like river or hillocks or like a mound, those are definitely the places where people tend to gravitate towards. But even things like say sports facility, swimming pool, libraries, which are I think they are very important in catering to public. And one of our actually attempt is if somehow we bring an ordinance, and say that, public infrastructure project, which are like sewage treatment plants, waste management centers, to water distribution centers. There are a lot of places which are sort of mechanized or kind of looked at as purely engineering project, and we feel that because our people are detached from these, important facilities, important infrastructure, we feel that there is disconnect, and that brings some sort of hidden or subconscious disrespect towards, how city works. And we feel that if we somehow can bring in ordinance that says that you have to give out 5% of your budget for, bringing these places in public realm, it would be really nice, that people can see, like if I can go and see it, if our kids can go and see, how the sewage is treated, I think we would know, that what sort of waste we are creating, what sort of effort it takes to process them.
Well, I think also the other side of that is to sort of get back to this question of how things are designed. It's as we have more ability to design public spaces, in particular when you're working with municipalities or other sort of government levels, there's infrastructure projects that need to be done. They have huge budgets, and sort of conventionally they've been thought of as sort of these standard projects. So you lay a pipeline, and then however it gets put in, it's just a standard thing, and then it becomes very messy at the top. And very messy when it interacts with the existing buildings, the street, and that sort of degrades the public realm, because when things are haphazard, then they tend to be treated as if they are haphazard, right? And they don't get the same kind of respect or cleanliness. And so the reality is that in the same budget, 5 or 10% of that budget, if you simply have a design team that actually is designing the public space. You put in pipelines, you have to dig up the road. You have to remake the public space. So rather than sort of remaking it and letting it sort of accidentally meet with a bunch of things, if the designers are integrated into that, then you have good public space, and you're not doing it actually at a major additional cost. You're doing it as part of processes
it becomes
which
very strategic
exist.
and
And I think that's one of the things that when we talk about how to get, or that's one of the things when we talk about how to get projects in the public realm, how other types of practices get in. I think we need to we're still in a stage where we have to be creative in thinking about how do we get people into these sort of processes, because the process itself tends towards construction and engineering, and then design isn't really part of the sort of government's process in most cases now. And so if we can start advocating for where design roles are, where designers can add value, and if we can do it in ways that make sense to the city, which are in ways that, like, if we can explain why it's a economic benefit, why it's not more expensive for a better outcome, I think then we have a lot of potential to sort of change the way that things are done and to demonstrate that there's a reason that designers should be included and sort of front-ended on that process so that we have better outcomes in the
there are
end.
like 10 questions I have on this.
No, because my follow-up question was going to be like, do you think there needs to be, a design intervention in like government projects? Because I feel like, like designers and design comes at a much later stage in the process rather than it being like the main thing to start off from.
So I think
just to add on to that, I have a statement that came to my mind, and I wanted you to, it's the same question, but it's just a statement that came to my mind. And in terms of architecture, I want you to just give that answer. Like, I feel the social world is in isolation. The world is getting social in isolation, but it is getting isolated as a world in society. I mean, everyone is social, but they are in isolation. But when it comes as a society, when we come together, we are all isolated. So it's just a statement that came to my mind. And in terms of what she's asking, how can architecture bring in your thoughts, something that can change?
If I try to mash up these two perspectives, I think that I think that part of the way, if we look at as architects, we are makers of things. We make things that are big and heavy and they exist in the world. They're not in the digital realm. Or maybe pictures of them are. That's how we get work, but it's how word spreads. But the actual experience of our work is a sort of big, heavy thing. And I think if we're pushing into that and thinking about experience and sort of trying to sort of bring that approach to making into the process of thinking about spaces in the city or thinking about the spaces where we come together, I think that's one space where designers can really add and sort of help contribute to or help direct the conversation about what are the kinds of things we need physically in the space to sort of connect us back to spaces. I also think that at another stage we do have designers that come into projects sort of when a project is identified, and then you design there, you get a tender and you put things through. But if we are able to sort of expand that forward to before the project is identified, that I think there's a lot of potential for, and that's something that we do in the smaller towns that we work in when we're working with Nagarpalikas. Actually, the first thing that comes is not do this project. It's, hey, we have a bunch of spaces. What can we do? What can you do in the space that I have? And I think that is the really interesting space. Like, what can we do? And because we have this particular, our particular areas that we know how to make things, and in knowing how to make things, we have to think about how people use them. So we have this sort of very specific opinion in that we know how to make the stuff that people will use. But then because the other part of being an architect is that you're always coordinating between all of the different agencies, the different people, like we're coordinating between the client, the people are the craftspeople,
so a lot of strings attached to one project.
And everyone has really different perspectives, and they have very specific ones. And so we're always having to sort of mediate those different perspectives. And so I think that's where also the that particular expertise is useful in thinking about, what can I do in my city? And sort of, I think, so we're not the only ones that should be in the conversation, but I think that we should be there, and there's a potential to sort of connect this sort of separate socialness that's becoming more isolated, and to sort of bring it into conversations about the spaces that we have and potentially can interact in or be anonymous in, which is what public space is.
You have anything to add?
No, slightly different point in the same area is there's a lot of expectation about beautification of public spaces. It's something that has sort of taken off, everywhere, even in small towns.
Like, what do you
big
mean by
cities.
beautification?
Yeah, so I would also ask the same questions, except I cannot ask that question to people who are telling me that, okay, do the beautification of this stretch of road.
This is what governments will come. They understand that they want beautification.
So
but beyond
architects,
that,
designers,
they don't know.
they are expected to beautify the city so that it looks good. Fair enough, we have that ability to do that. But more importantly, what I would say is that a good designer, especially if you're operating in public realm, you're expected to be a system designer. So you make sure that everything else before the last layer of, sort of aesthetics is working well. That takes care of people's psyche, people's usage pattern, and, how things are built, which are going to last test of time. So, because whatever that comes into physical existence, you're passing it on to the next generation.
What you say reminds me of what Steve Jobs said. It's like the beauty doesn't lie in the aesthetics, but it lies in the way things work.
Oh, absolutely.
So I
absolutely.
think that's what comes to my mind.
Yeah, but like also, I think I was mentioning this to you earlier, with people who, feel like there's so many bare minimum things they're asking for, like electricity, water. So, how do we sort of encourage the conversation about also the fact that they need public spaces, or this should be a thing that should be a part of your life, because that's also a difficult sort of a space, right? With our country, I think.
Well, I
think it's changing.
I think all of these things that we're talking about are things that have to be sort of hit on at many levels, because you have to be talking about this at a policy level so that you can get funding, that you have better programs. You have to look at it at sort of the city level, and there's many different things. But I think for us, because again we're people who make things, really making sure that we make one that works, that somebody can appreciate. I think that can have a lot of power in getting the ball rolling. I remember this lake that we worked on, the engineer from the city who was in charge of it, she did not give us the time of day. She had we were beautifiers, and in her mind that was nothing, right? And so she sort of, dealt with us when she had to, but didn't really make it a priority until this pavilion on the western edge of the lake that we had made, sitting on the SG highway, sort of connecting the lake to the highway. She sat in it. It was built. And it was, a kind of monsoon day, and the wind was perfectly coming through the pavilion over to the lake. And it was wonderful. It was sort of concentrating the air movement, which is what it was supposed to do, so that when you sit there, you feel the breeze. And she sat there and she said, "This place is really nice." And after that, actually, her attitude changed. She really, she had more time for the meeting. She was interested in the project because she had seen that there was a value in it, that we had. So I think that it's on us to demonstrate our value.
To make them
we can't expect that people
Yes.
listen to us
exactly.
until we show them what we are able to do.
We cannot expect them to know what we already know, or we've already visualized.
We have to demonstrate. We have to be good at what we do.
So the way to do that is basically show them the value.
It's interesting, like you are telling a way where we can improve, rather than putting it all outside of us.
I mean, we are done a huge disservice by bad design. There is lots of bad design in India. We can talk about the profession. There are very few barriers to entry. You can, anybody can start a practice, and that's in some ways good because it gives more opportunity, but then it also means that there's a lot of bad work that goes out there.
And also to communicate what we think, to make them experience like what you said, so that give them the benefit of doubt that they know if they experience it, they would value it.
Yes, and to be honest, architecture we have to be able to do things with our design that somebody will experience and understand without us ever telling them.
Right.
Right.
We cannot expect that we
You wouldn't be
explain our
there
projects.
always.
We're
Yeah.
never going to be there.
Yeah.
Right? We actually are there until people start using, and then we go away. So if our projects don't speak for themselves, if they don't do what they need to do, then I don't think we have a platform to argue that we're being ignored or disadvantaged. It's
Yeah.
our fault. So
Yeah.
we have to focus on building well, and making designs that do inspire people, that people sit in, that they realize that they work. So that, I mean, so it's this aesthetic question, but it's the way things work, you know? You make a
Yeah.
public space, you make something, the wind should go through it nicely. The light should be beautiful. I mean, it's a craft. We have
It's
to
like
be able
what
to
they
do it.
say, that good design is
Yeah.
good when it's unnoticed, but
Yeah.
it's very usable.
And also quiet and simple sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
The hardest thing to do is to make something minimal that works well. It's more about what you decide not to, how to get it together. I think it's a huge challenge.
I have one last question, which is like, in terms of, I'll give you the context. You have been in academia, you have given lectures, you have been with governments, you have been with private sector, you have done work for public and high net individuals. What is that one lesson that you learned through this journey individually that you would pass on to someone who is coming in, or maybe that you would want to reflect upon, that this is one lesson that I hold on to?
Can I give two?
Sure.
Okay, so the first thing that, I mean, I practice this before I'm preaching this, but I think we have to be patient. We have to be patient, and we have to be optimistic at the same time. Our job is to solve people's problem. We are serving people to have better life, and so we have to be patient in doing that, even when they are not patient. So that's one very important part. And the other important part is, which is something that we've sort of structured of late in our practice, is that we are reaching to that point where we know that climate catastrophe is about to happen, and the way we are consuming resources, the sort of opulent lifestyle and resource-intensive lifestyle that we are all having, we have also seen that there is a depletion in respect for old. That is, from old people to old everything. And sure, every now and then it pops up, in a glamorous way, in new avatar, and we all enjoy it, as a social space. But I think in general, we need to recognize that. Can we extend the life of everything that has come into the existence, and can we put to use all the places that we have created or our ancestors have created? And yeah, I mean, we are doing a bunch of those projects right now, including our office, which we're building in a 100-year-old building. Wow. And we're quite looking forward to, participating in a lot of those projects. And I think we all need to do that, so that, I mean, yeah, okay, we are increasing entropy, but can we slow down that process?
The lesson that I'll take, which kind of connects to that, but I think you always need to know how to ask questions, and to know what your limit is. I guess never be overconfident. It's important. To me, the fundamental thing that makes you good at what you do, that allows you to learn, is to be extremely curious, to keep asking and to keep trying to figure things out, and to also never assume that you know it already, because we learn from everything. I mean, we learn from everyone. I mean, to me, I keep remembering this sofa that we were trying to design for a project with this carpenter. The carpenter's incredible. Gujarati carpenters, they still, refuse to train people because they don't like young kids these days. The guys are in their 60s. But they wouldn't design it just because we had drawn it. They had to first prove to themselves that it worked. They knew so much more about wood, about how to cut wood, about how the grains work, about where the details work than we could ever, right? Because we're always working with people who are experts.
Yeah.
Whether it's a client who's an expert in how they live or what they need, whether it's the artisan who knows exactly what he wants to do, whether it's, the city engineer who knows what drainage needs to happen, right? So we're always have to be aware of the fact that we are learning more. And if we're open about that, then it's clear we know what we know, but we also know that we're always bringing in new knowledge. And I think that's where that question of like, how can you use every space more? How can you use also all of that knowledge that exists around you? And I think that if you can soak that up, I think that makes you very powerful and gives you a lot of opportunity.
There's a very nice quote from Maya Angelou that I recently came across. Do your best and do it better when you know it better.
Wow. I think that's like a mic drop, and like that's the point.
And that's a good note to end on. So we'll end this here. This was so nice. Thank you so much for doing this once
Thank you
again.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank
It
you
was
for
like-
inviting us. Yeah.
It's actually given me a lot of questions. Might be good, might not be good, but to reflect upon. Maybe next time we can come around.
Yeah.
Would be
More
great.
episodes to come.
More episodes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of The Flow State. This was really insightful and it left us with a lot of questions, and I hope that it leaves you with a lot of questions. So please keep listening to The Flow State and see you next time.